want kicking the things out of orbit.
Oh my gosh!
One
Of the greatest fighters.
John Jones beat every champion pretty much never lived.
If Khabib gets his hands on McGregor, it's gonna be that night.
Let's get into it. And just like that, Matt, we are back with This Week in MMA. As always, one half of your hosting duo, Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. Matt, as always, at Matt Allen FNP on the respective socials. And Matt, for a lot of people out there, this might be your first brush with This Week in MMA, and let me assure you something. Again, it's a totally reinvented show from what we've done in the past. The last episode dropped back in December. We had Adrian Yanez on, including Canadian country legend Tebe. But we're back for some twists and turns. We're always adding some new stuff with This Week in MMA. Matt, it was really a launch pad for Fight Night picks back in the day. This was originally what got us started in the MMA sphere. I couldn't be more excited to be back with it.
It's really fun to be back, and it is fun. Finally, we get the chance to talk about just other things outside of UFC. A lot of people know us for our prediction videos, of course, where we break down all the fight nights and pay-per-views, but finally, we get the chance to kind of go outside of our comfort zone, if you will. Get talk about some more Bellator, some One Championship, and really just what's going on in the MMA world outside the UFC.
So this week, we're going to open it up to the Twitter purge. We're going to be talking some Bellator 255, of course. We're going to have two official Fight Night Picks predictions in this video. So stick around for that. We're talking about the main event, Patricio, Pitbull, and the rematch with Emmanuel Sanchez. And in the co-main event, Neiman, Gracie taking on the ass-kicking machine, Jason Jackson, a guy that I've been high on since Jump Street. I love those fights. We got a great card coming up there. We're going to talk about Brave CF50. Huge fights on that card. That's also coming up this week, as well as some major news with the Twitter purge. We're going to pop in and out of some clips from the interviews that we've had from JHK, including a great talking point from Kyle Daukaus, who has a big fight coming up at UFC ABC #2. And then, Matt, we're also going to throw it on over to a new segment of the show called MMA Landscaping. And I'm not talking about what Tito Ortiz does at City Council. We got some big stuff to talk about. So, Matt, let's flip it on over to, well, my favorite segment of the show. It's called the Twitter Purge.
It's time for the Twitter purge.
UFC on ABC2, there's been a lot of people out there in the chats. Again, you guys are the predictions and preview guys, stick to it. But the main point is, when's the UFC predictions going to come out? Well, the fights are next weekend, and our scheduled main event, Darren Till taking on Marvin Vettori. Little bit of a wrinkle in that plan. Darren Till actually coming down with some collarbone issues. It was reported over on Twitter, as the show name is called. I mean, this is a Twitter purge after all. But it looks like maybe a bit of an unlikely short notice opponent for Marvin Vettori and Kevin Holland. Now, originally, these guys were supposed to face off against each other back in early winter. Holland was out due to COVID. Vettori took on Hermanson in the main event, and the rest is history. Holland fights Souza, knocks him out impressively. And then we had Kevin Holland's weird appearance against Derek Brunson just a couple of weeks ago where, listen, I mean, the rocket just didn't launch, and he was all about the jibber jabber and the trash talk. And now it seems like he's entered the ring to fight Marvin Vettori. Seems like a weird decision to me, and I feel like this might not actually come to fruition. These are still developing news and developing bits of information as we come live with the show. But out there, Ariel Helwani retweeted it. I mean, Holland looks like he's possibly going to face Marvin Vettori. I want to get your thoughts on it.
It's just kind of a weird situation, and I get that the UFC, by now at least, they must be used to just throwing new fighters in on a moment's notice because we have had so many cancellations throughout the last year, but a lot of the time it's due to COVID contact tracing or someone has COVID, and I'm going to say it's easy enough to rebook those fights because if it's contact tracing for two guys and either guy's sick, you can really just rebook that fight for next month, but since Darren Till did break his collarbone, it is hard to kind of get a timetable for when he will be able to return. And I'm not against the Kevin Holland matchup by any means. I'm against the timing of this whole thing because, like you had said, there is a bit of a storyline for Kevin Holland to fight Marvin Vettori. They were supposed to be booked, and both guys, of course, got different opponents. And we've seen both guys' career really just kind of progress from that point on. So Holland could step in on a moment's notice, but for me, it's tough to reward a guy who looks so bad in his main event debut, if you will, in the UFC. And it's not only the fact that he did lose the fight, because I think if he went out there and he lost by, let's say, like third round knockout, okay, well, first of all, probably shouldn't be taking a fight this quick. But if he had gone out there and had a very good Kevin Holland fight, but just ended up being the loser, then yeah, I'd be fine with throwing him in another main event slot. But just the way he went about acting in that whole main event, I wouldn't reward him for it, although I will. If the UFC makes the fight, you can't really be upset. He is a ranked contender at the weight class, and on 2 weeks' notice, if that's the best you can do, then that's the best you can do. But again, personally, I find it hard to reward a guy who did kind of act like that the first time he got such a big opportunity.
I mean, we always end the show with early stoppage, myself and John Franklin. You can catch it here, but the last segment of the show, it kind of goes towards r/MMA. And listen, you know, the underground whisper network over on Reddit, they eat that stuff up. But the main topic was, is Kevin Holland's time with Travis Lutter kind of at a standstill, or should he maybe switch gyms? And if you go back and watch the fight, Kevin Holland was more interested in jawing back and forth between himself, Dana White, and Habib than he was listening to his corner and Travis Lutter. And it was just such a weird spot where Lutter's been to the top of the mountain. I mean, he's challenged for a title. He's fought Anderson Silva in the past.
He missed weight in that fight.
He did, but still, for Holland to get his black belt under Lutter and then in the biggest fight so far of your career to just kind of check out, it was such a weird look. Is Derek Brunson more deserving of a fight like this? 100% he is, but maybe it's just not his time and he's not ready for it. He is late on in his career at this point. Perennial gatekeeper, but now he continues to move up. For me, it's weird because for Martin Vettori, he had one of those shuffling of opponents before where he had some bad blood. And that was, of course, with Carl Roberson, and we saw how that fight ended. So for Holland, for me, it's a no. But yeah, we'll have to see how it develops.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Matt, we'll flip it on into our next bit of news. Matt, finally, Paddy the Baddy Pimblett is going to be bringing his Tiesto and Heads Will Roll odd mashup of an intro song. And listen, Cage Warriors fans, I know you're out there, and people get excited about this. Matt, as a bit of a background, there's like staple promotions that we watch. You know, a fight might end up on LFA. Usually I'll end up doing the tape study on it, or I watch it the next day or what have you. For me, it's appointment viewing to watch Cage Warriors and KSW, and of course we're there for the UFC, but I'm always paying attention to Cage Warriors. This guy's been around for such a long time with the promotion, so finally he ends up with the UFC. Listen, I know there's been offers before and he's kind of turned them down, but to me it's just a little odd that you look at the fights that he's had recently. He fought Decky Dalton back in 2020. We talked about it. We previewed it when there was no UFC. And, of course, he won that fight. Before that, he's supposed to take on Donovan Desme and David Martinez. Well, he ends up fighting Martinez this year, a full year later to the day that he beat Decky Dalton. He beats Martinez, who really didn't have the highest level of competition. So 2 wins like that, you're into the UFC. How do you think he's going to fare? And what quality of opponent do you think they're going to give him first?
That's the real question, because in my mind, there's 2 different ways you can look at this. Because when Will Brooks first came into the UFC, they gave him Ross Pearson, and he was the Bellator champ when he did come over, and Ross Pearson, even at the time, this is before he lost every fight in the UFC, but Ross Pearson was one of those kind of like 25-20 guys. If you beat him, then yeah, you're going to go on and have a pretty good career, but he's not really going to test you like a guy in the top 50 would. And then you look at what Michael Chandler had to deal with in his first UFC fight. They made him fight Dan Hooker, and yeah, Dan Hooker had lost one, or was coming off a loss, but fighting Dan Hooker is no walk in the park. They're not going to do the same thing to Paddy Pimblett. They will more likely give him kind of the Ross Pearson treatment. I don't really know who you match him up with. And I think we're on the same page where you might have to taper your expectations for Paddy Pimblett coming into the UFC, at least for his first couple of fights, because we haven't seen the best version of him in a little while. And I know I was really excited for that Soren Bach fight, and I thought he was going to be able to beat Soren, and he didn't look good in that fight at all. He got out-grappled for a large majority of it. His cardio faded as the fight went on. So I still have quite a few questions about Paddy Pimblett against the elite level of competition.
And that's got to be a credit to Soren Bach. And
Sure.
listen, kudos Bellator. That was a huge signing. I was so surprised that he didn't end up with the UFC, especially where around that time, the UFC had a card in Copenhagen, Soren Bach. You could have had Nicholas Dalby, who ended up coming in on short notice to fight Alex Oliveira. It would have made a lot of sense, but Bellator swooped in and got Bach. Now, for Paddy Pimblett, I mean, you're right. You look at it, 4 wins by knockout, 8 by submission. Everybody remembers the Alexis Savitas, the flying triangle armbar back in 2018. So it's great to see him finally in the UFC. I've seen a lot of fans out there calling for Guram Kutateladze. I think that's way too early. Guram is a finished product. You saw that in his debut. To me, I hold Mateusz Gamrot in a really high regard, former KSW champ, and he's had some wars. If you want to see some good fights, go watch him fight Norman Park again and again and again.
So you're not saying Guram versus Paddy?
I wouldn't make that fight. I would say somebody coming off of a Contender Series win. I would say somebody maybe on a losing streak. Like, you got to kind of ease Paddy Pimblett in. because we saw what happened to his teammate. I mean, Chris Fishgold comes into the UFC, and they kind of give him weird matchups. I mean, Calvin Kattar to start off with, and then it just went down. But still, for a guy like Paddy, he's much younger than Chris was. He definitely has a good grappling pedigree, and we've seen his striking as well. He's a very creative fighter. I'm so excited to see him. I just hope that they don't push him too early.
It'd be nice to see like a David Tamor, just to throw a name out there. A guy who is a good striker, but not a knockout artist by any means. And he has a good ground game and not a great ground game. I just don't want them to throw him into like, hey, Paddy, your first fight's against Benil Dariush or Carlos Diego Ferreira. Like,
here's Alexander Hernandez.
Yeah, like there's some bad fights out there for Paddy Pimblett. I'm really in the camp of we don't need to rush prospects. Like, you can give them a couple tune-up fights just to know where they are in the overall kind of lightweight landscape, and then we can start testing Paddy Pimblett here and there. I just don't want to see them throw him into the murderer's row, and then he's out of the UFC in 3 fights.
All right, Matt, we'll move on from there and into some really, really big news, and it appears that Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, the third fight will happen on July 10th, Matt. You have to kind of assume that it's probably going to be a fight in front of the fans. Now, we have the UFC going to Florida. There's plans for Texas. Maybe we end up back in Vegas. But I would expect this one to be a stadium show. This is like you talk about appointment viewing TV. This is huge. Do you think it's too soon, or is this, you got to strike when the iron's hot?
It's a weird question, and I'm glad you brought it up. And I was going to ask you, are you any more excited for their third fight than you were for their second fight? Because I'm not. I got to be honest. Like, I was, and I'm the biggest Dustin Poirier fan out there. I make sure I say that every time we talk about him on the podcast. But, like, going into the second fight, it had been so many years removed since the first one. New weight class, basically 2 new fighters. You know how much Dustin's improved since their first fight. We're going to see the same fighters who just stepped in there not that long ago. And I like Conor McGregor. I'm not like a massive fan of him, but like he's a really good fighter. Don't get me wrong. There's just only so much you can improve on in the short amount of time. And listen, Conor McGregor has more resources. He has more available to him than I ever will when it comes to MMA training. He can train wherever he wants to in the world with really whoever he wants to in the world. But even with that, you've only got, 5 months to really make those improvements. And for Poirier, it's not like he's just going to go in there and try to calf kick him again. Like, Poirier will have another wrinkle to his game. So for me, I do think it is a little bit early. And what I would do if I was the UFC, now would have been the best time to do Diaz versus Conor, the trilogy, because that's a huge fight. It's both guys. We haven't seen them both in there with each other for a long time. So I'm sure both have a new wrinkle they could throw in. There's a bit more of a narrative there, and then make the winner of that fight Dustin Poirier, because Poirier's already a fairly big star because of his fight with Khabib, really just because of his whole UFC career and how wild his fights are. But then the fight against Conor really put him over the edge, especially by beating him in such an impressive way. So for me, I would have done Conor versus Nate. You could do that at 170. You could do it at 155. The winner of that fight's Dustin, and that's really just kind of like the perfect money fight tournament, if you will. So for me, I do think it's a little bit early because, again, I can just say, hey, didn't we just see that fight already? And you and I, we're entrenched into this sport. We love this sport. So for the average fan who maybe doesn't watch every single pay-per-view, well, hey, didn't I just watch Dustin knock out Conor not that long ago? Well, they're having a rematch. That just kind of sounds like a money grab. Oh, I could probably skip this one. Like, to me, I just don't know how the UFC is really going to market this effectively to the fans who just saw Dustin knock Conor out.
It's weird based on the way that the top end of this division shakes out right now, because, of course, they made the fight between everybody's favorite Brazilian Charlie Olives and Michael Chandler. That's for the vacant belt. Habib is now, and I hate to use air quotes, but officially retired. We knew he was retired when Dana White did the whole behind closed door thing on UFC on ABC 1.
How many free dinners did Khabib get from Dana is the real question.
Well, he's been packing them on, so I'd say quite a few. But if you look at this, I mean, Justin Gaethje's kind of sitting on the periphery. He could be an alternate for that fight. He's probably next in line, which leaves Dustin in an odd spot. And for Dana White to kind of come out and say, hey, you can't fault Dustin for taking this fight against Conor, I have to keep saying, who the hell's faulting Dustin Poirier for taking huge money fights? If you're out there, I'd like to meet you, because it's absolutely insane. Give the guy, his due, give him his credit. He deserves these fights. And if he's building a name off Conor McGregor, then so be it. I mean, for McGregor's part, to come up with the, he trained for boxing. When was his fight against Mayweather? Years ago.
Before the Khabib fight.
He had all kinds of time to work on his footwork. So I don't see why that whole footwork argument and the difference between a fight in, early 2021 to July is going to change his footwork so drastically that we're going to see such a different Conor McGregor in that cage. So for me, yeah, it seems a little silly that you have a rematch that quick, or in essence, again, the trilogy fight. But it just doesn't seem like a good one for me. I get it. Huge numbers, so again, it makes sense from that respect, but for me, it's a no from me.
I'll watch it. We'll probably do a fight companion for it, so we'll be here for it. But yeah, just the timing does seem off. And I understand the UFC, they want to capitalize on, or at least make use of International Fight Week. I'm sure they'll try to do something just sort of pandemic pending. But with the UFC, we don't really know. They'll push through no matter what. So I understand it's a big fight. But yeah, to me, I just feel like the timing's off.
So, Matt, I said this is one of those things that we were going to do, and we've had a lot of great interviews so far on the channel from our own John Hyun Ko. You know him from Kumite TV's at JHK over on Twitter and Instagram. But he's been talking to some really influential fighters in the game. We already have 3 interviews in the books from just the one card UFC on ABC 2. And one of the ones that I wanted to focus on, Kyle Daukaus. He's got a big fight coming up against UFC newcomer and undefeated middleweight Aliaskhab Krizhev.
Good job, Johnny.
It's a difficult one, yeah. Yikes. But he has a really big fight coming up. And I mean, his opponent's quite a bit smaller than him. John asked him a lot of good questions about that matchup, but as well, kind of what he has planned. And the main talking point out of the interview that I just wanted to spend some time on was the fact that Kyle Daukaus has a little bit of a different view on some of those unified rules of MMA and his own take on the Aljamain Sterling Petr Yan controversy, as well as maybe some of the changes that we could see. So let's throw it on over to our former friend of the show, now member of the show, JHK MMA.
Now, on that same night, Petr Yan was DQ'd against Aljamain Sterling for an illegal knee. The next weekend, Leon Edwards, the eye poke, that went into a no contest. Man, do we need to change some rules and regulations in this sport? Do you think we're seeing something that we need to change?
I think that, in my honest opinion, I'm a fan of 12 to 6 elbows. I'm fine with that. Throw that as much as you want. And I like knees to the face on the ground. Like I just think it's another thing you have to worry about. Soccer kicks and stuff. I mean, sure, why not? Like, it's fine. It's fine with me. Like, I'm gonna get kneed standing. I'm gonna get elbowed standing. I'm gonna get punched and kicked standing. Why not just have the same thing on the ground? But the rule set that the commissions have now, it bothers me because the UFC is like, oh, we adopted a new rule set. These are going to be the new rules, but the states don't have to, or the countries don't have to. Like, when you fight in Nevada, it could be different if you fight in Pennsylvania. So I think it just needs, like, everybody just needs to agree with one thing. They need to agree with one rule set and just stick to it. I think like the whole, like, if my hand's down, I can't get kneed, and my fingers. But if, like, my fingers are on the mat, then I can get kneed. Like, we need to just make it flat, like a flat rule. Like, you can knee at any time, you can elbow at any time, any position, anything. And as far as eye pokes and stuff like that go, getting new gloves is kind of tough. I think that's just I don't know. I mean, they tell you to keep your hand up and away from your partner's like face and eyes and stuff, but it's just tough when you're in the heat of the moment.
Yeah, man, that's something that I understand from a fighter's perspective is like when the ref says get your hands, like, fingers up. That's a weird position to put your hand, right? Because you need to be able to punch somebody if you have your hand out. So it's just natural to put your fingers out.
Yeah, and even if you're, like, blocking or trying to, like, guard or stuff, your hand's open. You just kind of, like, block and then, like, reach away.
Yeah.
So I mean, it just happens. So I think those are just, like, freak accidents and stuff.
So it's really interesting to hear a UFC fighter actually talk about these things, because this is usually something that you hear media members talk about, fans talk about it as well. The fact that, listen, do you like the pride rules? Do you like soccer kicks? Are you fine with Manel Kape in his next UFC fight come out in wrestling shoes? I'd love to see it. I'd be all about it. But it's always interesting to actually get a take from a fighter. And for Kyle, pretty honest in his answers. I was kind of surprised.
It's really interesting, actually, when you realize the amount of fighters who do kind of advocate for pride rules. Because I would think, okay, if I'm in the cage, I want whatever the least likely position to be in to get soccer kicked. And there's a lot of fighters out there who are like, yeah, soccer kicks should be allowed. They don't really mind them. Because really, in theory, you're not going to get soccer kicked if you are defending yourself the right way. Like, if I'm fully conscious and I know how to defend myself and I'm on my back with my guard open, how are you going to walk around my legs to kick me in the head? Like, it does make sense to a certain degree, but I can also understand, okay, let's just take this weekend's main event. Francis drops Stipe with a hook. Stipe's pretty much out. He still hits him with that last hammer fist, which I think we can all agree, super unnecessary. If he had soccer kicked him instead, we're not just dealing with, hey, Stipe, are you ever fighting again? It's like, hey, Stipe, are you okay for the rest of your life? So I do think it's interesting, and there is going to have to sort of be a line that you have to draw. Who is there to say 12-6 elbows are okay, but soccer kicks aren't? And I guess who really drew those lines already? Because It is weird to me how a 12-6 elbow is not okay, but I can bounce my shin off your head if we're standing. And I understand the 12-6 elbow, whoever saw it on TV and the whole Joe Rogan story, but it is just kind of odd to try to figure out how the rules of MMA were really put into place in the first way. But it is interesting. Daukaus advocates for it. Demetrius Johnson's another guy who's come out and said, like, hey, pride rules aren't that bad of an idea. Are you okay with A, a ring, and B, wrestling shoes? Because to me, those are the two biggest differences between UFC and really pride, or just use
Even
whatever-
Ryzen.
Even Ryzen, yeah, choose whatever other kind of rule set. I think the ring to cage is really the biggest difference. And wrestling shoes, I know there was a joke with Cop. To me, that's where I draw the line, just because it does make taking somebody down way harder if you have wrestling shoes on. It gives you such an unnatural grip on the ground. And also, if I kick you with shoes on, it's going to hurt a lot worse than if I don't have shoes on. Unless someone walked in with, like, dope Kobe's or something, that'd be kind of cool. But
Timberlands.
oh, wow. Just out there stomping. It just is interesting when fighters are kind of advocating for the sport to almost be less safe.
The one thing that I really want to focus on that Daukaus said was, I don't really think they're going to make any changes with the gloves and so on and so forth. For me, I've got a pair of UFC gloves here in the studio. You put those gloves on, I can pop my fingers all the way back. I've got a pair of cheap knockoff, they're Chinese gloves that I ordered on AliExpress just to have. And they're almost more the Bellator or Pride style where they curve your fingers, and if you really try to force it, you have a really hard time with it. Now, a lot of people talk about it, the referees, especially in the night where right after Edwards' fingers below Muhammad's eye, right after that, just about every referee in the fight would say, hey, fighter, watch your fingers. But again, most of these MMA fighters, when they practice their boxing, they wear boxing gloves. So you're not having your fingers out there. But when you're finding your distance, when you're finding your range, when you and your opponent are hand fighting for position, your fingers are usually out. It's a tough thing to say, hey, make sure you're pointing them up or you're keeping a closed fist. So for me, it's so difficult for the fighters. Why not take their mind off it by giving them a curved glove? And it's not like, oh, well, if we do that, then we're following KSW, Ryzen, Bellator. See where I'm going with this? A lot of the other organizations already do it. I don't see why they don't. And we were talking about this off air, Trevor Whitman has his own, what is it? Onyx is the brand.
I think so,
He
yeah.
already has his own training gear and gloves. And I think the problem is the UFC's locked into a contract for the gloves. Now, it's not like Reebok makes those gloves and they'll switch over to Venom. They're made exclusively by a totally separate entity. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But that's one of my major gripes right now with MMA. The other one, unified rules of MMA. They're not unified if not everyone adopts them. It's the same thing with, can you get a therapeutic use exemption, or can you end up with, marijuana in your system? Well, the UFC doesn't care. And certain jurisdictions don't care, but others do. It really gets into murky waters. So for the glove, I'd love to see a curved glove. I don't see why they don't move to a curved glove. It doesn't affect anything else. You might as well go with it. But unified rules, unify them.
It would be really nice, again, like you said, if the unified rules were the same everywhere, because there's nothing worse than right at the start of the broadcast, they'll say, this state uses the unified rules, but doesn't use replay, which I always thought was a part of the unified rules. It is really odd just how every state just kind of, they make up their own rule set, and they just sort of kind of follow the overall guidelines, and it would be really nice if everyone did just sort of follow the overall. It doesn't make sense to me, too. The UFC glove. You would think the UFC, who has had main events now be overturned because of eye pokes, which has cost them a lot more money, wouldn't try to develop some sort of a glove on their own, or at least partner with Whitman. I understand, like you would say, they have that contract, but at a point, there becomes a point where it's going to cost you more money not to fix this issue than putting money into the issue trying to fix it. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just curve the gloves, and I think everyone would be a lot happier because of it.
All right, Matt, it's the moment that everybody's been waiting for. We got two really big cards this week, Brave CF 50, but you also have Bellator 255 on Good Friday. We have huge fights on this card. So we're going to flip it on over to, well, the predictions that we usually do. Two official Fight Night Picks predictions, your main event and your co-main event. Matt, as we always say with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it. All right, Matt, in the co-main event of this week's Bellator 255, we have a former title challenger, Neiman Gracie, looking to take on one of the top fighters Bellator has going at this moment in the ass-kicking machine, Jason Jackson. And Matt, one of the major talking points in This Week in MMA, we're going to talk about the Bellator rankings, and they're a little bit all over the place, but you could really consider either of these two men in that number one slot, and I don't think you're going to have a lot of controversy. And for Neiman Gracie, again, his second to last fight, he took on Rory McDonald. It was a little bit of a snoozer. One judge had it 49-46 for McDonald, the other two 48-47. For Jason Jackson, he lost his Bellator debut to Ed Ruth, and listen, I think he beat Ed Ruth. It was a good fight. It was a very close fight. It's definitely one that you should go back and watch. But then Jason Jackson did something weird. He fought 3 UFC vets, and he blew the doors off all 3 of them. He beats Keich Kunimoto. He beats Jordan Meehan at Jordan Meehan's game. And then he beats Benson Henderson. And not only does he beat Benson Henderson, and listen, it was short notice. It was at 170 pounds, and I'm going to talk about some of the circumstances around it. He out-grappled Benson Henderson, and I never thought that anybody would do it like that. Jason Jackson did it. He's got his hands full with Neiman Gracie. We know the name. We know how accredited he is in jiu-jitsu. You look at the record in Bellator, and he's considered a homegrown guy because he got a couple of fights with World Series before he came to Bellator. 8-1 total record. His level of competition hasn't been that great, but in his last fight, he basically retired John Fitch on a crazy heel hook.
This is a really, really fun fight, and I am going to treat this as a number one contenders fight. I don't really care what the Bellator rankings say or where either one of these guys are in the rankings, because if Neiman Gracie can beat Jason Jackson, that's a way better win than anyone else, than Michael Page has in the division. If Jason Jackson can do the same thing to Gracie, I would argue that's a much better name than anyone Page has beat. So I am treating this as a number one contenders fight. And I'm going to oversimplify all of this. I agree with everything you said, although I think Jason Jackson did fight those 3 UFC vets near the twilight of their career. It's not like he's beating guys in their prime. Jordan Means very much past it, so is Benson Henderson, and he was so much bigger than Benson Henderson. If Neiman Gracie can take down Jason Jackson, this fight is over. If Jason Jackson can just avoid the takedown, this fight is also over. Because for Jason Jackson, with that Sanford MMA connection, he fights a lot like Vicente Luque. He just doesn't have the black belt that Luque has on the mat, where he's not as dangerous with his submissions on the mat, but he does have better control. He does like that Carlos Condit, who'll kind of grab the far ankle and the far wrist just to control his opponent. It's a really nice move, but doing that to an undersized Benson Henderson is one thing. If Jason Jackson goes for a single takedown on Neiman Gracie, I would fire every coach I have if I'm Jason Jackson, because Neiman Gracie, like poor Ed Ruth told you, Ed Ruth was like, hey, Neiman, I understand his last name's Gracie, but I'm pretty good at this jiu-jitsu thing myself, and we all saw how that fight turned out. Neiman Gracie cut through him like a hot knife through butter once the fight hit the mat. Now, Jason Jackson, wicked striker, big power, good accuracy, really rangy striker too. If Neil Magny knew how to use his reach, he would strike a lot like Jason Jackson. It's just Jackson has pop at the end of his shots, and I don't think Jason Jackson has knockout power as much as he has knockdown power, and I think it's a good thing for him, actually, because he does have really good cardio and output to complement his striking power very nicely. So, really, just to sum it up, if Jason Jackson gets taken down, he's going to lose, and he's going to get choked out, and I don't think it'll be competitive. If he can keep it standing, I think it'll be the same thing, just on the feet.
And if you look at it for Jason Jackson, you want to go back and you really want to harp on wins and losses. He has a loss to Hader Hassan. Vicente Luque lost to him on The Ultimate Fighter, so there's that. He has lost to Mike Graves in The Ultimate Fighter Season 21. He has a loss to Colby Covington back in 2012, and then he lost to Kyle Stewart over on Contender Series. And it says ankle injury on Tapology. I implore you, if you're going to watch this fight, if you're thinking about this one, go watch it over on Fight Pass, because it's really weird. Like, there's a kick, and then he rolls his ankle, and it's just unfortunate the way that fight ends. But this guy has huge upside. You talked about it. Really good striking, good defensive wrestling, good defense when he's on the ground, good offense when he's on the ground too. Neiman Gracie is kind of like a slicker Damian Maia. Like, he's a slicker, younger Damian Maia. His striking's, I would say, rudimentary. He's a guy that's trained out of Henzo's in New York for a very long time. You got the Danaher Death Squad. If you go over on Neiman's Instagram, he spent some time at Gracie Baja HQ a lot recently, so he's been in California. Who else has trained there recently? Rafael Dos Anjos. There's been a lot of names. Brian Ortega. The list goes on. So I expect an even better Neiman Gracie this time out. Again, you talk about, since he's been with Bellator, he's fought the skinny Luke Thomas and Zach Busha, Javier Torres, Ed Ruth that he finished, and that was a 5-round fight in the tournament. For Jackson, it was a 3-round fight. And listen, if you want to use MMA math, Neiman Gracie wins this fight. But let's talk about the odds for this one. And then I've got a weird wrinkle about it. So the odds, you have Gracie, who opened at plus 160, he's now at a minus 107. For Jackson, open a minus 185, now at a minus 117. And the other thing I wanted to throw in this, Gracie's ranked 3rd in the Bellator rankings. Jackson's ranked 6th. And if you look at the Tapology votes for this one, Matt, 644 of them, 80% Gracie, 84% by submission. A little bit of a surprise for me because, again, if you actually look at Jason Jackson, he's only been submitted once in his career by Mike Graves on The Ultimate Fighter 6 years ago. But Neiman Gracie is that next level. So I love this fight. The thing that I want to throw in here about Jason Jackson, he did fight Benson Henderson at the tail end of last year. And Mike Mazzulli was all over him in his corner. Actually, Greg Jones and Henry Hooft got 3-month violations. They couldn't corner anybody, but it was like a Connecticut thing and the Mohican tribe, and it was a little weird, but they broke COVID protocols during fight week. Mazzulli was all over it. He likes to get fired up on shows, so there's that. I expect Jones and Hooft to be in his corner. We'll see how that one shakes out, but I love the fight. What's the final pick here?
I'm going to go with Neiman Gracie. I do feel like he has faced these slightly higher level of competition because when you do look at Jason Jackson's best wins, like Jordan Mean's a good fighter and he's good at everything. So a win over him does mean something. It means that you yourself must be somewhat well-rounded because Jordan Mean can take you down, can strike. Just again, he's kind of good at everything. Neiman Gracie's that kind of specialist though. When you bring up the fact that Jason Jackson only been submitted once, well, Tyron Woodley had never been submitted until he was by Vicente Luque. And Luque's not nearly the grappler that Neiman Gracie is. And for Gracie, even if you stuff his first takedown, when you said him and Damian Maia, the comparison, they both do half guard sweeps very, very well. And if Neiman Gracie gets his first takedown stuffed, he's going to put you in a deep half guard and try to take your back from your own takedown defense. I think stuff like that's the reason that Neiman Gracie can be able to get this fight to the mat, but I do think this is going to be a phenomenal fight.
The Woodley comp was awful. I mean, Woodley was rocked
Okay,
before,
but my whole point
still,
is, just because you've only been submitted one time before, you're fighting a Gracie. It's a lot different now.
I really like Jason Jackson in this fight. And again, it's for the fact that he's so well-rounded, he's so heavy-handed. And again, if he's very, very heavy on top and has good wrestling, Rory McDonald was able to beat Neiman Gracie that way. When Rory was in a weird period, we're talking like draw against John Fitch, he beat Neiman Gracie, end up in the finals, and Douglas Lima rocks your world. So for me, I'm going with Jason Jackson in this one, but I love this fight, Matt. It's an awesome one. Let's move over into our main event, Pitbull taking on Sanchez for the second time. When we talk about this featherweight Grand Prix, you've got Patricio looking to defend his belt. He had Pedro Carvalho the first time out. Now he's going to be taking on Emmanuel Sanchez in a rematch. AJ McKee's your number one ranked contender, but he was on the other side of the bracket, and he's already booked his spot in the finals with... Have we come up with a name for that submission over Darren Caldwell?
The McKeown.
The McKeown. So he beat Darren Caldwell by McKeown. Now he's in the finals. This is our last semifinals. That only makes sense. Pitbull beat Sanchez in the first fight. What an awesome fight it was. But if you look at Patricio Pitbull, and I see a lot of people out there, we threw this one out in the YouTube community tab, 87% of fans went with Pitbull to win. And the majority of fans that commented said, why isn't this guy in the UFC? Get this guy to the UFC. And I know what you're talking about, because if we just go back to 2019, he knocked out Michael Chandler flush, and he won that lightweight belt. You look at his overall body of work. I'm going to read these off. He beat Chandler. He beat Juan Archuleta, your current bantamweight champ. He's beaten Daniel Strauss 3 times. 3-1 is what their 4-fight streak is. He beat Wilson Hayes, former UFC title challenger. He's beaten Daniel Weichel twice, who's been a perennial kind of contender guy up there before Bellator had rankings. Emmanuel Sanchez has wins against some of these guys that we've heard of too. I mean, you look at it, Henry Corrales, another one is Daniel Pineda that's in the UFC. He's beaten Strauss, Carcagna, and Sam Sicilia with one of the most slick submissions I've ever seen. The standing choke where he finished him, it was crazy. And if you look at Pitbull and his losses, one of them, Benson Henderson checks a leg kick, Pitbull hurts his leg. All right, that's fair. Unanimous decision loss his other one, and then 2 splits to Joe Warren and Pat Curran years ago, the unanimous to Strauss. This guy's fought a high-level competition forever, and he's only 33, almost 34. This fight's awesome.
It's insane just how good Patricio Pitbull is. It really is, and I don't think Bellator has a pound-for-pound rankings, but if they do, he would be number 1 without a doubt. Hands down, that's how good Patricio Pitbull is. And
yeah, he is. He's number 1.
He is good, so there is a pound-for-pound. He's number 1. That does make sense, because like you said, his level of competition has been absurd. And the fact that he's been able to be this dominant over multiple weight classes is really the impressive thing, and I know he really only had the one fight at lightweight against Chandler to get the belt, but still, the fact that he knocked out Michael Chandler, who's now fighting for a UFC belt, and who's favored to win the UFC belt in his next fight, is really impressive. It's going to be a tough fight for Emmanuel Sanchez. It really is. And his toughness, his cardio, they're going to carry him very far in this fight. Does he have a good ground game? Yes, he does, but Patricio Pitbull's starting to get into that Amanda Nunes category where you're like, okay, this other person's a grappler. Well, how good's Patricio at grappling? Oh, he's a black belt. He's actually really good on the ground. Oh, well, is his stand-up any good? Yeah, he's probably the most heavy-handed striker we have at 145 pounds, regardless of organization. It's just really hard to ask, unless your name's AJ McKee, on how you're going to beat a guy like Patricio Pitbull. And it's not like Emmanuel Sanchez won't have a chance. Like I said, he's got the cardio, he has the chin. He's going to be there all 25 minutes, more likely than not. It's just, can he submit Patricio? Well, probably not. That's really hard to ask him to, and I doubt he can take him down in the first place. Can he outstrike him? Maybe for some periods just with his volume, because Emmanuel Sanchez can fight with an insane amount of volume. But even that, it's going to leave him in the pocket. We know what happens when you stay in the pocket with Patricio Pitbull. It even happened in the first fight. Emmanuel Sanchez starts to hammer away at Pitbull, starts to land good volume. Pitbull cracks him one time, and then you can tell, okay, the power is such a difference that Sanchez really can't be dedicated to a disciplined game plan without eating power in return. It's not like I don't like Emmanuel Sanchez. I think this will be your fight of the night if Bellator had such a thing, but it's just so hard to pick against Patricio Pitbull, really against anybody at this point.
I mean, for Patricio, you go back where they had the Bellator selection show, and was it long and drawn out? You're damn right it was, but at the end of it, or at the start of it, it was, hey, I want the worst guy in this competition, Pedro Carvalho, it's you.
So mean.
And he knocked him out. He hit him flush in the forehead, knocked him out. Like
It wasn't competitive.
It was insane, and yeah, it was a mismatch, big time. But I look at this fight, in a rematch, it makes a lot of sense. For Emmanuel Sanchez, what does he do well? Really good ground game, really interesting takedowns too. He has a nice low kick, and he throws a great jab. And you can't, listen, you laughed at me when we talked about Trevin Giles. Got a good power jab.
Because that's not the thing I think of.
Emmanuel Sanchez has a really, really good jab, and he can establish distance fairly early. You're fighting a small guy. And Patricio's small for featherweight in stature and in reach. He's small. He's really small for lightweight. It's just insane what he can do. He can control distance a lot. He can move in and out so well. And you look at Pitbull training out of either Pitbull brothers or when he spends time in Arizona, Eric Albarracin, his coach. He's got Henry Cejudo. He's got his brother Patricky. He's had, Bruno Silva. A lot of people have been talking about him recently and his win over JP Bays. That's another guy too. But there's so many good fighters. Leandro Higo's another one of those guys who's been in his corner for a long time. So for me, Patricio's got that pedigree. For Emmanuel Sanchez, he's been a Rufus sport since jump. And I mean, you talk about the Pettis brothers, one in PFL, one with Bellator. Really good shot for Sergio to get a chance at the belt here soon.
Oh, yeah.
For Sanchez, so many good opportunities. It's just a really tough ask in this rematch. So if we look at the odds, Matt, Patricio opened to minus 260, got down as low as a minus 330. Now he's a minus 261. For Sanchez, open plus 200, got up to a plus 253. Now he's at a plus 207 or thereabouts. And if we look at the Tapology votes, 726 of them, 93% Pitbull, 52% by knockout, 41 by decision. I think it's going to be pretty well the same as the first fight. I do expect maybe a bit of a different game plan from Sanchez. Maybe he tries to shoot or land more volume early, but it's a really tough ask here.
Here's the thing. It's cool just as I look at the pound for pound to my right. There are 3 fighters in featherweight in the top 10 pound for pound. So that just tells you how stacked this weight class is. And of course, it's the remaining 3 featherweights in the tournament, McKee, Sanchez, and Pitbull. But I agree with you. Pitbull is going to go in there, probably land big power shots. I would be surprised if he did finish Sanchez, to be honest, because Sanchez, you can eat those shots for 25 minutes, but it's really hard to ask somebody to eat those bombs for an additional 25 minutes. Emmanuel Sanchez managed to get out of the first fight without getting finished, but especially those later rounds after Sanchez had kind of spent himself early, you could tell that Pitbull was just kind of running away with the fight as it progressed. So I like Pitbull quite a bit in this, and there's a reason he's your number 1 pound fighter over in Bellator. And like Patricio Pitbull is a problem to deal with.
Matt, both of us going with Patricio Pitbull to get the win, and hopefully everybody liked the 2 predictions. This is an awesome card, Matt. Let's throw it on over to a new segment. We're calling it MMA Landscaping, so check it out. We're going to talk about some of the things outside of the UFC, namely your Bellator 255 card. Of course, we have a great card coming up this week, and I wanted to say weekend, but on Friday, you have Bellator 255. And listen, we talked about the main and the co-main, but Kana Watanabe taking on Alejandra Lara. I mean, Lara's one of those fighters, she's come so far since the Colombian regional scene where she fought Sabina Mazao. She's made it kind of up to the top of the heap. She challenged for the belt against Lima McFarlane, didn't go all that well. For Watanabe, I mean, she's a big deal globally. Not only is she a big star in Japan, but I think it's going to start to come through with some of the American fans. That's a great fight. Usman Nurmagomedov taking on Mike Hamill, and a lot of people are counting Mike Hamill out. A lot of people are saying he's a scrub, this, not, whatever. Yeah, he's coming up a weight class to fight Usman Nurmagomedov, who's undefeated, a cousin of Habib, and we talked about him on, Fight Night Picks over on Instagram. What's the show called? Keeping Score. We talked about him as somebody that you should watch coming up this year. Mike Hamill fought Adam Borch last time out, and Hamill was a plus 1,100 underdog. Lost by split decision. I scored that fight 29-28 Hamill, and it was really, really close. This is going to be a tough fight for him moving up in weight, but that's one you got to watch. Tyrell Fortune rematching with Jack May. They fought not that long ago. Jack May lost with ex-MMA handily to a guy that I had never heard of in my entire life.
Why is Jack May still getting fights? And I don't
because
mean
Mitrione fell out the week
Oh,
off.
no, I understand. I'm just saying, like, it is surprising that Jack May's the guy who they decided to jump in on short notice. Another guy who everyone should know fighting on the prelims of this card. Did you ever think that Roger Huerta would be on Bellator prelims? Is that really a position you ever thought that you would be in?
And an underdog to 5-0 Chris Gonzalez. And Roger Huerta now 24-12 with like one draw. It's insane. You look at the fights that he's had. Since he left the UFC, he lost to who? Ken Flo. He lost like 2 big fights. He beat Clay Guida, lost 2 in a row, left the UFC.
Lost to War Machine.
And since then, it's been bad. It's been really bad. With Bellator, they haven't done him any favors, though.
No, they really haven't. The Benson Henderson fight was just rude to start with. The Pitbull fight was terrible. Like, they've done Huerta 0 favors so far. And this really is just a case of them trying to capitalize as much as they can off of whatever is left of the Roger Huerta star power. But it just really is sad to see how far his career has fallen from what it once was.
Canada's Mando Nialo taking on Ricardo Sexias. I mean, for me, Nialo's a big star. Lost his last fight. It didn't go all that well, but he's a great guy out of TriStar. I know he's trained a little bit in Ontario too, but a guy that you have to watch. Magomedov on the prelims, heavily favored to get a win over CJ Hamilton, that a lot of people know from the U.S. regional scene. But for Magomedov, has a win over Piotr Jan. And then Piotr Jan beat the brakes off him in their next fight. His last fight was against Matos, who fought Piotr Jan too. Like, Magomedov's the guy you have to watch. Fabio Aguiar's got a big fight against Khalid Murtazaliev, where you might go, I know Khalid Murtazaliev. Didn't he finish CB Holloway? He did. And then he popped and got a 2-year suspension with USADA. Now he's over with Bellator. Muhammad Burkamov's got a big fight against Herman Tirado. That one was kind of switched around because originally Burkamov was supposed to be taking on Jordan Meehan. Would have liked to have seen that fight. Tirado, UFC vet, lost his 2 UFC fights. And you also have Jordan Newman, who's a huge blue chip prospect on this card. But Matt, Bellator 255, as good as it is, on screen, we've had the rankings the whole time, and I wanted to spend some time with the Bellator rankings because it happens that, well, our own JHK MMA is on the rankings panel, but there's been a lot of uproar about these. I have to say first, A, it's cool that people are talking about Bellator, and B, it's awesome that they have rankings now.
It's not. I gotta be honest. I liked it more when they didn't like rankings for this reason alone. Bellator had an excuse to make whatever fight they ever wanted to, and now they don't. That was the one good thing about Bellator. They didn't have to be locked in due to rankings, and they could make whatever fun fight they wanted to. And they could really baby their prospects, and they didn't have to rush them up and make them fight killers automatically. All rankings do is ruin your prospects' chances of actually getting the belt. That's my opinion. I'm not, just because I'm saying it doesn't mean I'm right, but this truly is how I feel about it. What Bellator... They kind of had a free card because it allowed them to really build Michael Page up. And no one put any pressure on them to make him fight a guy in the top 10 or make him fight a guy in rankings. They could just make him fight people. And you had really no way of telling, oh, this opponent's better than that guy because there were no standardized rankings. I liked it more when there was no rankings in Bellator, I've got to be honest.
So we bring up Bellator's rankings, and I mean, Jaleel Willis had a lot of success over with LFA. He's got a win with the promotion here with Bellator. That's great. Oliver Enkamp, when he was with the UFC, it didn't go all that well. He was a little young coming in, and he's looked great in Bellator.
He really has. And this is my last part about the rankings. They are set what they are, but take 3 weeks. Like, after Bellator's done 2 shows, I do think they'll have a better idea as to kind of where everyone is. But for right now, it is hard to say, oh, well, Neiman Gracie's beat these guys. He's third. Like, I understand it's a really hard task to just throw these fighters into our rankings right now, but it will take a solid 6, 7, 8 months for us really to get a good idea as to where everyone settles in.
And I agree. The big conversation, that's why I put it up on screen, was welterweight. Because in the prediction video for our Gracie and Jackson fight, to me, that's a number 1 contender. 100%. I mean, I would have had Jackson 1, Gracie 1. Who else is up there? Yaroslav Amosov was a guy where, did he struggle against Logan Storley his last time out? Yeah, and I thought Storley really, he gave a great account of himself. That was a really close fight. But for Amosov to beat a guy like that, that gets you up to 1. Michael Venom Page hasn't beaten anybody in this top 10, and he's ranked number 1. And listen, I like MVP. I think he's a really exciting fighter. You can call him a can crusher. He beat the Japanese fisherman Shinjo Anjai, so there is that. But you can't have him as your number 1. And I don't know if that was a promotional thing, if it was the rankings panel, that's how it ended up with it. Doesn't seem like it was, so it's just a really weird pick. And then you go down through, I mean, Storley deserves to be there. Derek Anderson's a really exciting fighter. Like, Joey Davis, such a good wrestler.
Too early for Davis, though.
Sabaho Masi gives it 110%. But what are we doing with Michael Page, number 1?
It doesn't make any sense to me, but the same thing can be said for the UFC. Like, this isn't a Bellator rankings problem. This is a rankings in MMA problem. MMA does not have a set of stats that you can just go by that tells me this team's better than that team. It's all very subjective. So it is hard to say this guy should be the number 1, 2, 3, and then all the way through 10. It's a hard job for anyone, like I said, but them putting MVP first is not a great look, because I do think the people who watch Bellator, and there's not a lot of us out there, let's just be honest, it's not like Bellator is this massive global market by any means, but the people who watch definitely know that Michael Venom Page is not a deserving number 1 contender. The people who are going to watch Bellator are invested enough, since they are watching Bellator in the first place, to have a good idea as to who the other guys in that division are, because I think it's fair to say if you watch one Bellator show, you're probably watching the majority of them. I doubt there's a lot of just casual Bellator viewers who only watch for the main events here and there.
I was waiting for Ink Master on Paramount Network. I guess this fighting's going on.
Whoops, I'm just going to go to MTV and watch ridiculousness now for 24 hours. But again, it's a really hard ask for anybody. But I do think it's just an issue with rankings in MMA. There's no standardized set of stats. And I know we like to go through stats, but stats don't really make that much sense in MMA. It's the one sport where you can throw a 50-point Hail Mary with 1 second left, even if you're down by all the numbers. So for me, it's just an issue with the whole rankings as a total. I thought without the rankings, it did give Bellator a certain flexibility with their matchmaking that the UFC really didn't allow them to have. And I'm sure the UFC kind of regrets they have rankings sometimes too, because they could just throw Conor McGregor into whatever fight they could if they didn't have rankings, and no one would ever bat an eye to it, because rankings really do come down to, people love to argue about them, but they don't really mean that much in the end. So for me, I think it's okay that they have them. I'm not completely against it. But I do think that they've kind of put themselves into a corner by allowing these rankings. Bellator, the great thing about them were they did try things new and they weren't just like the UFC. Well, this makes them seem more like the UFC. And if I'm Bellator, I steer it the other way and just go against what the UFC's doing. I do more tournaments and less rankings.
The rankings mean so much. They don't mean anything.
Well,
Listen,
don't.
all I'm happy with is that our guy, Timothy Johnson, ranked first, and he deserves it. That guy has gone on an absolute heater recently, and I'm really looking forward to what he has in store. But Matt, this isn't just, the Bellator landscape. This is the MMA landscape. So let's talk about some of the other things that are going on out there in MMA. Now, Matt, this isn't called the Bellator MMA landscape. This is the MMA landscape. We're talking about stuff outside of the UFC. And in a strange move, it seems like the guy that's chasing whatever he can on the History Network is now going to be fighting with Bare Knuckle FC, BKFC. It looks like Tim Kennedy, former Strikeforce great, is going to be plying his trade in the 5-knuckle tango. Now, Matt, it's weird to me. It just is. I mean, we haven't seen Tim Kennedy since he fought Kelvin Gastelum back in 2016. That was the last time he fought competitively. Now you're going to go to bare knuckle. And listen, I mean, you got to consider it. Paige Van Zandt made the move. Austin Vanderford didn't like it. I bet Bellator didn't like it. And at the end of it, well, Britton Hart fought a feeling. So you had that. And for Tim Kennedy to kind of apply what he did in the UFC and all the success that he had in MMA. And listen, whether you like him or not, or whether you agree with him on social media or not, this is straight up weird.
Yeah, because the majority of fighters that we see, and here's the thing, it is always fighters in the later stage of their career. It's not like you're seeing a lot of up-and-comers on the last fight of the UFC deal be like, yeah, I'm ranked number 11 now, the future looks bright, let's go fight people without gloves. It's just not something normally prospects do. It's a lot of these people, oh, I have one fight left on my deal, well, I'll go bare-knuckle box. Tim Kennedy's a really good grappler, though, and that's what doesn't make any sense to me. Like, most of the guys who go over and make that transition, if you even want to call it that, it's the Artem Lobovs of the world, the Thiago Alves of the world. Jason Knight. Grappler. But at least Jason Knight's known as a guy who's just going to go out there and scrap no matter what the rule set is. But Thiago Alves, well, all he does is Muay Thai, really. Throws hands, has leg kicks, so you eliminate the leg kicks. Still a pretty good boxer. The majority of people, who move over, they can strike, whereas Tim Kennedy, his striking's kind of bad. He is sort of what that early 2010s MMA fighter is, really just late 2000s. He's a specialist, and his specialization isn't striking. So for me, this is a weird carryover. If I was Tim Kennedy, I just do submission underground every other weekend. Like, I think there's other types of combat sports that Tim Kennedy could do to make money, and that's if this is a money grab by him. Maybe Tim Kennedy just really wants to fight people with his bare hands, but just go back to the Kelvin Gastelum fight. He does really well on the mat. When he's forced to make it a boxing fight, because it's not like Kelvin Gastelum throws many kicks, he gets tired really fast, which I don't think is going to serve him very well in bare knuckle, and he doesn't have great boxing technique. And yeah, that fight was 5 years ago, so maybe Tim Kennedy's done nothing but hunted Hitler and worked on his boxing, but it's a weird crossover for a guy who, again, not really known for his striking, and maybe he can sell a few tickets. Tim Kennedy, a decent-sized name, but I don't see Tim Kennedy as one of those, like, wow, I really wish he came back to MMA anytime soon. Like, there's fighters out there who I'm like, yeah, it'd be nice if they had one more fight, but Tim Kennedy's never that guy.
It's really weird. Like, what are we doing? Are we carrying the torch for Leonard Garcia because he just retired with bare knuckle? Like, it's just an odd move. Are we going to try and take Chris Lytle's job on the commentary desk? Like, I just don't get it. So, you know, you go out and you watch some of these BKFC events, and listen, to say that I'm a media member that overly enjoys bare knuckle, I do not. WBKFF disenfranchised me. Now, listen, BKFC, totally different organization, but I don't like it personally, and it's not something that I want to talk about a lot.
It's like white wine.
I like white wine. I don't like red wine. Don't like red wine. White wine's fine. But I look at this and I don't get it. So we'll see what happens. I mean, listen, it was just a tweet or an Instagram post that was thrown out there by Tim Kennedy, but it caught some traction. We'll see what happens, but it's just a weird one for this year.
Puzzling for sure.
So today, Matt, as we're recording this, we got a little bit of Spider Silva news, and I want to get the instant reaction. Anderson Silva is going to take a boxing fight, and it has been years since his last boxing fight. He's going to fight June 19th against Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. And listen, while his father was one of the greatest boxers of all time, son Jr., not so much. I mean, he had a fight against Canelo years ago. He fought Daniel Jacobs. And listen, I'm one of those boxing guys, like, listen, I cover MMA as an MMA media member. I'm an auxiliary member of the MMA Journalists Association. I say that because when I go to these events, I'm not chugging beers and clapping and cheering for fans. I'm taking my notes like a nerd on the side of the cage, and sometimes I get blood splattered on me. But with boxing, yeah, I'm perfectly fine to do all that and sit with a bag of chips on the couch. And I watched Julio Cesar Chavez fight Daniel Jacobs, and I've never been more disappointed in a fight because the commentary team the whole fight says he has a propensity to quit. And then he goes out there and with his father face in his hands, quits on the stool against Daniel Jacobs. So you have Julio Cesar Chavez that I thought, well, that was probably it for his career. No, you'd be wrong. He's fought twice since. He lost again, and then he beat Jason Minda. The other thing about Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., both of these guys have some USADA-type issues. Julio Cesar Chavez can't fight in Nevada or Arizona because he refused to do a drug test for the fight against Daniel Jacobs. This fight taking place in Mexico. For Anderson Silva, well, he just lost convincingly to Uriah Hall. He got finished in the 4th round. He's looked like a shell of himself since, 2012 when he beat Stephan Bonner?
No. That's not true at all.
He had competitive fights, but he's lost. I mean, even in the Cormier fight, I guess he gave a good account
that
of
means
himself.
you're not a shell. Okay, I would say the Bisping fight was the last time we saw the Spider, but yes, it's been tough after that.
So it's been a long time since we've seen the best out of Anderson Silva. Are you more excited for this than you are for the Tim Kennedy bare knuckle stuff? What are you... Does this make any sense?
At least Anderson Silva knows how to throw punches in a good way. It's weird because they caught him at the worst part of his career. I'm of the team of... I would have loved to see Anderson Silva box when he was 32. And that would have been before I really even cared about MMA because I would have been 9 years old. So...
Well, he's 45 now, and by the time of this fight, he'll be 46.
Exactly. So for Anderson, I don't really know what he has to gain from this. I'm sure he's getting a paycheck, don't get me wrong, but Anderson Silva doesn't really have a good chin at this point in his career, and the one thing Conor didn't have against Floyd, which was the gas tank, well, Anderson Silva does still have a pretty good gas tank, but at 46 years old, your chin's a little suspect. You don't have the reaction time you used to have. You rely heavily on your reaction time. And now you're fighting a primary boxer who has held boxing titles. Now, I understand he's not at the best part of his career. He's another guy who's 35. It's not like you're getting a young up-and-coming killer. But Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. has still fought Canelo, has still fought Daniel Jacobs. Guys who are real boxers. And Anderson Silva hasn't fought a real top contender in MMA for years now. Yeah, Uriah Hall's good, but Uriah Hall didn't even look that good in that fight until he knocked him out. So it's just a weird fight, but I'm more excited for this than I am for Tim Kennedy's foray into bare knuckle.
I mean, if you look at it on BoxRec, Julio Cesar Chavez is their third-ranked Mexican light heavyweight. He's the 93rd ranked light heavyweight in the world.
Doesn't mean anything.
Listen, you've got some decent fighters ahead of him, Derevyanchenko being one of them. But I look at this. You got a guy that's 52-5-1 with 34 knockouts, and he's, what'd you say, 35 going into this one. Why, Anderson? Why? You don't have anything to prove. Anderson Silva's probably not going to beat Julio Cesar Chavez Jr.
He's not, I'm telling you
Unless
right now.
Chavez Jr. decides to retire on the stool, which I don't see as possible. And listen, again, I have to say in full transparency, did I watch the fight against Mario Abel Cesares? No, I didn't. But I did watch the Daniel Jacobs fight, and Daniel Jacobs is a really good boxer. So it's just such an interesting matchup. It's so weird. I mean, listen, Rafael Cordero did wonders for Mike Tyson, so maybe he's worked Anderson Silva into a 46-year-old wonder kid. But I just don't see it. This is so weird.
You hate to see fights like this because it's, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. can't get good fights in boxing, so this is what he has to resort to get people to talk about him. And for Silva, you're 45, your MMA dream's kind of over. You were the best ever, but you still want to compete because you don't really know what else to do. It's just kind of a sad fight, to be honest.
All right, Matt, we'll flip it on over, and we'll leave you with something good. So, Matt, that's this week in MMA in a nutshell. I was so glad to bring the show back. It was one of those things, like I said, I always used to do it when it was an audio-only podcast. Mondays and Fridays, there were 2 interviews on every show. It took so much out of my day, and nobody listened to it. And now it's a little bit different. We're always going to keep retooling it. So let us know down below in the comments section.
Or tweet at us, Instagram, just any way to get a hold of us, really.
Exactly. Let us know what you want to see on the show. If there's things that you'd like to change, you let us know. We need the feedback. But we got a great week in MMA. Bellator 255, Brave CF 50, and that's what I just wanted to talk about really quick. Ismail Nardiev, the Austrian Wonder Boy, had a win with promotion over in Europe. Now he's competing with Brave FC or CF for their title at welterweight against Strad Al-Salawi. That's a huge fight. I mean, I've talked about Al-Salawi in the past as a guy that you need to watch outside of the UFC. You've got huge fights on this one. UFC vets, Ali Bagbatinov taking on Dustin Ortiz. That's an exciting one. You also have a lot of other former UFC vets on this card. Zach Makovsky's another one. Brad Katona, Canadian, former tough winner. And we can go down on through this list, but there's a lot of great ones. Felipe Silva's another one. And again, so on and so forth, but a really good card. And listen, the point of this week in MMA, Matt, we're not so focused on the UFC. We can talk about other stuff out there. I'm just excited to get the ball rolling and starting to have a conversation with everyone.
100%. Yeah, this weekend there's Bellator, there's Brave CF, but there's going to be KSWs in the future, Rising's one championship. Like, we can talk about anything on this show, so it'll be a lot of fun moving forward.
All right, Matt. So like I said, hit us up. You can find us, Craig Allen FNP, Matt Allen FNP, and at Fight Night Picks, Instagram and Twitter. And we're really looking forward to bringing the show back. So let us know what you're thinking. And as we always say, Matt, with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it.